No, but seriously, you have to hear this.
Oh, not again.
He set the USB drive on the corner of my desk at 4:03 on a Wednesday afternoon and slid it across the wood toward me with 2 fingers, the way a person slides a chess piece they have been thinking about moving for a long time. His name was Sebastian. He had been my husband Dominic's best friend since they had been 17 years old at a boarding school in upstate New York. He had been the best man at our wedding. He was the godfather of our son. He was, by every measure of family I had developed in the 14 years I had been married to Dominic, the closest thing my husband had to a brother. He was also not the kind of person who showed up unannounced at my office. I worked as the senior development officer for a small private museum in Providence. My office was on the 2nd floor of a converted carriage house behind the main gallery. I had a window that looked out onto a small courtyard with a fountain that had not worked in 3 years. I had a door that I usually kept open. Sebastian had closed it behind him when he had come in, which had also not been the kind of thing he did. He sat down across from me. He did not say hello. He set the USB drive on my desk. He pushed it toward me. He said, "Soraya, listen. Do not go home for dinner tonight. Do not call Dominic. Do not text him. Do not respond to any messages he sends you between now and the time you watch what is on this drive. Watch it here. Watch it now. I am going to wait in the small conference room down the hall. I do not want to be in the room when you watch it. When you are done, come find me. We will talk. If you decide after watching it that you do not want to talk to me, you can throw the drive away and pretend I was never here. I will leave. I will not say anything to Dominic. I will not say anything to anyone. The decision is going to be yours. But you have to watch it first." I sat at my desk. I looked at the drive. It was a small black plastic stick with a silver cap. There was a small white sticker on the body. The sticker had a single word written on it in black marker. The word was please. Hit subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. Stay all the way to the end of this video. There is a thing I learned in the next 4 hours about the man I had been married to for 14 years, and the way I learned it, and the way I decided to respond to learning it, has been the most careful work of my adult life. Listen the whole way through. Sebastian left my office. He went down the hall. I heard the small click of the conference room door closing. I sat with the drive on my desk for about 90 seconds. I did not move. I tried to think about what could possibly be on a drive that Sebastian would drive 40 minutes from his office in Pawtucket to deliver to me in person on a Wednesday afternoon, with a one-word apology written on the side. I plugged the drive into my computer. The drive contained one folder. The folder contained 3 files. The files were labeled in order 1, 2, and 3. I opened the first one. The first file was a single document. It was 11 pages long. It was a printout of a series of emails. The emails had been sent over the previous 14 months between my husband Dominic and a woman whose name I did not recognize. The woman's name was Anka Pernilla Voss. The emails had been sent from an email address I had not known my husband had. The email address used his middle name and a number. The address was not professional. The address was not the kind of address a person uses for work. The address was the kind of address a person uses when they are creating a parallel email address that their wife will not see. The emails were love letters. They were love letters in the specific way that emails between adults who are conducting an affair are love letters. They were not, mostly, explicit. They were arrangements about where to meet. They were small references to previous meetings. They were occasional longer messages from him about a future the two of them were going to have together. The future involved leaving me. The future involved telling me the truth eventually, when the time was right, when our son was older, when the timing was kinder. The future, in his words to her, was the real life. The current arrangement, in his words to her, was a holding pattern he was managing until the real life could begin. I read the document slowly. I read every page. I did not rush. I made myself read every word. I closed the document. I opened the second file. The second file was a spreadsheet. It was a record of withdrawals from a bank account in Dominic's name that I had not, until that moment, known existed. The withdrawals went back 19 months. The withdrawals totaled, by my quick reading of the totals at the bottom, just over $146,000. The withdrawals had been used, by the descriptions in the second column, for things including a one-bedroom apartment in Cranston that had been rented since spring of last year, a series of vacations and weekend trips to cities I had thought my husband had been visiting for work, a small luxury sedan that had been leased under a corporate name I did not recognize, jewelry purchases at 3 different stores, and a quarterly retainer to a divorce attorney in Newport whose name was at the bottom of the spreadsheet, who had apparently been giving Dominic preliminary consultations for the previous 11 months. The money in the account had come from a real estate investment my husband had made 8 years earlier with his late grandfather's inheritance. I had known about the investment. I had not known the investment had been sold 3 years ago. I had not known the proceeds had been moved into a separate account that I had no signing authority on. I had not known that the proceeds had been used to fund a parallel life that had been running, alongside my actual life, for nearly 2 years. I closed the spreadsheet. I opened the third file. The third file was a single PDF. It was a draft of a divorce filing. The filing was not signed. The filing had been prepared by the Newport attorney 3 months earlier. The filing had not been served. The filing had not, as far as I could tell, been filed with any court. The filing was a draft that had been sitting on a shelf at a law office in Newport for 3 months, while my husband had continued to come home for dinner, kiss me on the temple, attend our son's hockey games, sleep next to me, plan our summer vacation, schedule date nights, and tell me, in the small, ordinary ways he told me every week, that he loved me. I sat at my desk for a long time. I did not cry, yet. The crying was going to come later. The not crying was a thing my body did because it had not yet processed what I was looking at, and because some part of me had decided, somewhere underneath the part of me that was deciding things, that I was going to need every piece of clarity I could find for the next several hours, and that crying was going to interfere. I closed the laptop. I sat with my hands flat on the desk. I tried to think about what Sebastian had given me, and what he had not given me, and what he had asked me to do, and what he had asked me not to do. He had given me documentation. He had given me the kind of documentation that a person who is preparing to leave a marriage on their own terms needs in order to leave from a position of information rather than from a position of shock. He had given me the documentation in private. He had given me the documentation in my office, where I had the rest of the afternoon and evening to process it, where I had access to my own laptop and my own files and my own employment status. He had given me the documentation in a way that gave me control over what I did next. He had not told my husband he was coming. He had not told my husband he had done it. He had given me the choice, by his presence in the conference room down the hall, of whether to make him a part of what came next, or whether to make him disappear and pretend the afternoon had not happened. He had not, by giving me the documentation, made any decision for me. He had not said, "You should leave him." He had not said, "He is a bad man." He had not, anywhere in the things he had said to me when he had walked into my office, editorialized. He had said, "Watch this before you say a word." He had said, "The decision is going to be yours." He had said, "Please." The please on the drive was, I realized as I sat at my desk, the most important word he had used. The please was him asking me to trust him. The please was him acknowledging that he was about to do the second hardest thing he had ever done in his life, which was to tell the wife of his best friend that his best friend had been lying to her for nearly 2 years, and that he was doing it because the alternative, which was to keep being the friend who held the secret, was going to make him a person he could no longer be. The hardest thing he had ever done, I would learn 3 hours later, when we eventually talked, was that he had known about the affair for 6 months before that afternoon, and had spent the 6 months trying to convince Dominic to end it and to come clean. He had given Dominic ultimatums. Dominic had said yes to the ultimatums. Dominic had not honored them. Sebastian had finally, 2 weeks before that afternoon, told Dominic that if Dominic did not tell me himself by a specific date, Sebastian was going to tell me. The specific date had been the previous Friday. Dominic had not told me. Sebastian had spent the weekend deciding. He had spent Monday gathering the documentation, which he had been able to access through a small, unrelated business arrangement he and Dominic had been running together that gave him visibility into one of Dominic's email accounts. He had spent Tuesday confirming. He had driven to Providence on Wednesday afternoon with the drive in his pocket and a one-word apology on the side of it. The apology, he would later tell me, was not for telling me. The apology was for the fact that he had been a witness to my husband's betrayal for 6 months before he had told me. The apology was for the months I had been kissing my husband goodnight, while Sebastian had been carrying the knowledge of who I was kissing. The apology was for the fact that there was no version of his behavior over the previous 6 months that he was proud of. The apology was for the fact that, in the end, the please was a word a person uses when they have run out of other ways to ask forgiveness, and when they are not sure forgiveness is the right thing to ask for, but when they cannot think of anything else to put on the sticker. I sat at my desk for 15 more minutes. I did not move. I tried to make my brain work. I made a list, on a piece of paper, of the things I needed to do in the next 24 hours. I needed to call my sister. My sister was a family law attorney in Boston. I needed to ask her, before I did anything else, what the legal landscape looked like for a woman in Rhode Island whose husband had been documenting a parallel life for nearly 2 years, and whose husband had a draft divorce filing already prepared by another attorney. I needed to make sure our son was taken care of for the next 2 nights. He was 9. He was at a friend's house for a sleepover that night. Tomorrow night was supposed to be a family dinner. I needed to figure out, before tomorrow night, where I was going to be and where he was going to be. I needed to talk to Sebastian. I needed to find out in detail what he knew and what he did not know. I needed to find out whether he was prepared to be a witness, if it came to that. I needed to find out, more importantly than that, whether he was a friend I could trust through what was about to be the worst year of my life, or whether his loyalty was going to start tilting back toward Dominic the moment things got hard. I needed to not go home for dinner. I needed to make a decision about where to sleep that night. I needed to think about whether to confront Dominic that night or whether to wait until I had legal counsel. I made the list. I underlined the items in order of priority. Then I stood up. I walked down the hall. I knocked on the conference room door. Sebastian was sitting at the small round table with his hands folded in his lap. He had not been on his phone. He had not been working. He had been sitting there, waiting. I sat down across from him. I said, "Sebastian, thank you for bringing this to me. I am going to need to ask you a lot of questions over the next several weeks. I want to start with 3 of them right now. And then I want you to leave, because I have a phone call to make to my sister, and I want to make it before the close of business in Boston. Are you ready?" He said yes. I said, "First, are you going to be on my side in this? Not on Dominic's, not in the middle, on mine." He said, "Yes, I have been making that decision for 6 months. I made it for good 2 weeks ago when I told him I was going to tell you. I am on your side. I am not going to switch. I am also not going to be in your day-to-day life through this if you do not want me to be. I am going to be available. I am not going to push." I said, "Second, have you told anybody else about what you brought me today?" He said, "No, I have not told my wife. I have not told my mother. I have not told my law partner. I have not told anyone. The only people who know I came here today are you and me. I said, "Third, do you have copies of everything on the drive in your own files, in case something happens to the drive?" He said, "Yes, I have copies in 3 separate places. One of them is at my office. One of them is at my mother's house, in a sealed envelope she does not know the contents of. One of them is in a safe deposit box in Boston that only I have access to. The copies will exist no matter what happens to the original. The copies will be available to you, or to your attorney, or to a court at any point you need them." I said, "Okay, that is what I needed to know. Go home, Sebastian. Tell Annalise the truth about where you were today, because I do not want your wife to wonder about anything between us, and because I am going to need her on my side too, eventually. Tell her I said hello. Tell her I will call her in a few days. Drive carefully." He stood up. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Soraya, I am sorry." I said, "I know. I am not going to forgive you today. I am also not going to need you to be forgiven today. We will figure that out. Go home." He left. I called my sister. I want to skip the rest of the night because the rest of the night was practical and detailed, and not the part of the story I want to put in a video. I will tell you the headlines. My sister listened to me describe the documentation for 43 minutes. She asked me clarifying questions. She told me what to do that night. She told me what to do the next morning. She told me which Providence attorney to call at 8 a.m. She told me to book a hotel room for the night. She told me to text Dominic before I left my office that I was working late and was going to crash at a colleague's. She told me to keep the text short. She told me not to lie more than I had to. She told me to drive to the hotel and to order room service and to sleep if I could sleep. She told me she was getting on a train the next morning and would be in Providence by 10. She did not ask me how I was. She knew, the way sisters know things, that asking me how I was at that moment was going to break me, and that I needed not to be broken for the next 6 hours. I texted Dominic. I wrote, "Stuck at work, going to crash at Marigold's. Kiss the boy for me. Talk in the morning." He wrote back 2 minutes later. He wrote, "Got it. Love you. Drive safe if you change your mind." I read the text 3 times. I sat at my desk and I read those 11 words 3 times in a row. The text was the cruelest thing I had ever read. The text was not cruel because of anything in the words. The text was cruel because the words were the same words he had been sending me twice a week for 14 years. And the words were now also the words of a man who was running a parallel life with another woman in Cranston, and was preparing a divorce filing in Newport, and was telling me, on a Wednesday afternoon, to drive safely. I deleted the text from my mind. I did not delete it from my phone. I needed it as evidence. I drove to the hotel. I checked in under my own name. I ordered room service. I ate a club sandwich. I did not finish it. I lay on the bed with my clothes on and the lights off, and I cried for about 2 hours. The crying was the crying I had been holding for the previous 4 hours, and that my body had been waiting to release. The crying did not mostly sound like crying. The crying sounded like a person who had been alone in a room learning how to breathe a new way. I slept for about 3 hours. I woke up at 4 in the morning. I lay in the dark. I thought, for the first time, about the rest of my life. I want to skip ahead now, because the rest is the work of the last 14 months, and the work is the part that matters. I did not go home for the next 3 weeks. I lived in the hotel for the first 4 nights. I moved to a small, furnished apartment that my sister found for me, in a building owned by a friend of hers, for the rest of that period. My son stayed at our house with Dominic for the first week, because I had not yet figured out how to tell my son anything. and because my sister and the Providence attorney had advised me very strongly not to disrupt his routine until I had a custody arrangement in writing. I told Dominic on the Saturday after the Wednesday. I told him in the office of my attorney, with my sister present, with his attorney present. I had not given him any warning. He had spent the 3 days between the Wednesday and the Saturday wondering why I had not come home, and why I had been responding to his texts with short, polite messages, and why my sister was suddenly in town. He had been asking. I had not been answering. The meeting was 4 hours long. I will not describe it. I will tell you that he cried. I will tell you that he tried several times to reframe the situation in ways that put me at the center of his decision to be unfaithful. I will tell you that my attorney, whose name was Henrika Vasiliou, who had been practicing family law in Providence for 27 years, did not let him do that. I will tell you that by the end of the meeting we had a temporary custody arrangement, a temporary financial arrangement, a no-contact provision for the woman in Cranston regarding our son, and a written acknowledgement from Dominic, signed in front of his own attorney, that he would not be moving anybody else into our marital home for the duration of the divorce proceedings. The divorce took 10 months. The divorce was, by every measure my sister and Henrika had given me to compare it to, a clean divorce. The cleanness was almost entirely the result of the documentation Sebastian had given me on the Wednesday. The documentation had given me, from the first moment of the first conversation, a position of information that Dominic had not been able to negotiate around. He had tried. He had not been able to. The papers had told the story. The papers had not been negotiable. I have full custody of our son. Dominic has every other weekend and 1 weeknight a week. The arrangement is working as well as these arrangements work. Our son is in therapy. The therapy is helping. He is 9 years old and he has been told, in age-appropriate language, that his father did some things that his mother could not stay married to, and that his father is still his father and is still going to be in his life, and that his mother is going to be okay, and that he is going to be okay. He believes us, on most days. On some days he does not. We are working through those days as they come. Dominic married Anka Pernille Voss 4 months after our divorce was final. I was not invited. I would not have gone. They live in the apartment in Cranston. Our son spends his every other weekends there. Anka is, by our son's account, kind to him. I am, for our son's sake, grateful for that. I have not met her. I do not plan to. Sebastian and his wife Annalise have remained in my life. Annalise called me 3 days after the Wednesday. She drove to Providence. She sat on the couch in my furnished apartment with me. She did not say much. She brought me a casserole and a bottle of wine and a card. The card had a single sentence in it. The sentence said, "I am with you, and so is he." She has been with me, every month since, in small, reliable ways. She and Sebastian have had me over for dinner every 6 weeks for 14 months. They have included my son in family events. They have, in the small daily ways friendship is built, decided to be the people who absorbed the loss of Dominic from their lives by replacing him in mine with care. Sebastian and Dominic are no longer friends. The friendship ended on the Wednesday Sebastian drove to my office. Dominic has tried twice to repair it. Sebastian has not responded. Sebastian has told me, in our small, careful conversations over the last 14 months, that the friendship was over the moment he decided to put a USB drive on my desk, and that he had known, when he had made the decision, that he was choosing me over 31 years of brotherhood with Dominic, and that he had made the choice cleanly and was not going to undo it. He has not undone it. The choice has held. I have built, in the last 14 months, a smaller and more honest version of my life. I still work at the museum. I have been promoted. I have a small group of friends, mostly women, mostly in their 40s, who have been through their own versions of what I went through. We meet for dinner on the 3rd Thursday of every month at a small restaurant downtown. We do not, mostly, talk about our marriages. We talk about books. We talk about our jobs. We talk about our children. The not talking is the friendship. The friendship is what holds. I want to leave you with one thing. There is a category of person in our lives that we do not, mostly, have language for. The category is the third party who knows. The category is the friend or family member or coworker who finds out, before we do, that the person we have built our life around has been building a different life on the side. The third party, in almost every case, faces an impossible choice. The choice is whether to tell us, which costs them the friendship they have with the betraying partner, and which often costs them their position in a social or family system they have been part of for years, and which is going to make them, in the eyes of many people, a person who blew up a marriage. Or the choice is whether not to tell us, which costs them, every day, a piece of their own integrity, because the not telling makes them a witness to the betrayal, and the witnessing is its own kind of harm. Most third parties, in my experience listening to the stories of the women in my Third Thursday dinner group, do not tell. The not telling is the default. The not telling is the default because the cost of telling is enormous, and the cost of not telling is invisible. The not telling lets the marriage continue in a hollow shape for years, sometimes decades, because nobody is willing to be the person who says the sentence out loud. The not telling is, in a way that I think we as a culture have not fully reckoned with, one of the small, ordinary mechanisms by which a lot of bad marriages stay bad longer than they should. Sebastian told. The telling cost him a 31-year friendship. The telling also cost him, in the small ways nobody talks about, a portion of his social life, his connection to mutual friends who did not understand why the friendship had ended, his standing in a network he had been part of since he was a teenager. The telling cost him things he has not, in 14 months, finished losing. The telling gave me, in exchange, the ability to walk into a divorce proceeding from a position of information. The telling gave me, in exchange, the chance to leave a marriage on my own timeline, instead of on the timeline of the man who was preparing to leave me. The telling gave me, in exchange, 14 months of my life that I would not otherwise have had. 14 months in which I have not been the woman whose husband is cheating on her and who does not know it. I have, instead, been the woman who is rebuilding her life on the other side of a hard truth she received on a Wednesday afternoon at 4:03. The trade was not fair. The trade was almost never fair for the third parties who tell. The trade is something they do anyway, in the small percentage of cases when they decide that the cost of their own silence has become unbearable. I am asking you to do one specific thing this week. I am asking you to think about whether there is a person in your life right now who you owe a hard truth to. The hard truth does not have to be infidelity. The hard truth can be anything. A small lie that has gotten bigger. An observation about a relationship the person is in. An acknowledgement of something you have noticed about their patterns that they have not noticed themselves. A piece of information about a third party who has been hurting them. You do not, this week, have to tell them. You only have to think about whether the hard truth exists. You only have to be honest with yourself about whether you are carrying a small, ordinary betrayal of a person you love by way of your silence about a thing they would want to know. If the answer is no, then the answer is no, and you can move on with your week. Most of the time, for most of us, the answer is no. The honest accounting is what tells you. If the answer is yes, the work begins. The work is not immediately to tell. The work is to figure out, slowly, whether telling is the right thing for the specific situation you are in. Sebastian did not tell me the moment he found out. He spent 6 months trying every other option first. The 6 months were not, in retrospect, time wasted. The 6 months were due diligence. The 6 months were Sebastian making sure that the telling, when it happened, was the only remaining honest option, and that he had earned the right to be the one to do it. The earning matters. The earning is what separates the third party who tells out of integrity from the third party who tells out of malice. The earning is what makes Sebastian the kind of friend I will have for the rest of my life. The earning is what is going to make you the kind of friend the person on the receiving end of the hard truth will be able to forgive for telling, eventually, in the way you need to be forgiven. If you are carrying something, sit with it. Decide carefully. Earn it. Then, if you decide to tell with a USB drive and a one-word apology on the side. Tell in private. Tell without editorializing. Tell in a way that gives the person you are telling the control over what they do next. Then leave them to decide. The leaving them to decide is the hardest part. The leaving them to decide is the part that distinguishes the friend who tells from the friend who interferes. Sebastian left me to decide. The leaving was the gift. The gift was that he gave me the documentation and walked down the hall and waited in a conference room and did not, in any way, try to influence what I did next. I made the decision. The decision was mine. The decision has been mine for 14 months. The decision has been mine, partly, because the way the truth was delivered to me made the decision possible. The truth, well delivered, is a gift. The well-delivered part is the gift. The well-delivered part is what you owe the people you love when you have decided, after careful work, that the telling is the only honest option left. I had dinner with Sebastian and Annalise last Saturday. We ate at their small house in Pawtucket. They had made a chicken dish that Sebastian's grandmother used to make. The chicken was good. We talked about a movie I had not seen. Their dog, who is a small terrier mix named Quentin, sat under the table and accepted small pieces of chicken from each of us. My son was at his weekend with his father. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet when there are 3 adults who have been through something together and are eating a meal in the small, careful pace of people who have decided that the eating, on a Saturday night, is the friendship. I drove home alone. I went into my own house. I locked the door behind me. I sat on the couch in my living room. I did not turn on the television. I sat in the quiet for a long time. The quiet was mine. The house was mine. The life was mine. The USB drive that Sebastian gave me on the Wednesday afternoon is in a small envelope at the back of my desk drawer. The please sticker is still on it. I have not looked at the contents of the drive since the day of the divorce. I do not need to look at it. I keep it because it is the smallest possible record of the smallest possible moment that the rest of my life pivoted on, and because the keeping of small records is the practice I have decided to maintain for the rest of my life. The small records are the proof. The proof is the thing you hold when somebody, someday, tells you that you imagined it, or that it was not as bad as you remember, or that you should have stayed. I did not stay. I am not going back. The drive is at the back of my drawer. The sticker is still legible. The single word is please. I have built a life on the other side of that word. The life is small and honest and mine. If somebody this week hands you a please on the side of a hard truth, take it. Watch what is on it. Do not respond immediately. Sit with it. Earn your response. Then live, on the other side of it, the life that the truth makes possible. The truth, well delivered, is a door. Walk through the door.